This used to be the Naxal Corridor, a vast red belt stretching across India. But in just the last decade, something dramatic happened. The red began to shrink fast. A movement that began in the 1970s as a revolutionary cry for land, justice, and dignity slowly morphed into a bloody, tangled game of terror. This is the story of Naxalism, Maoist insurgency built on ideology, force, and decades of violent extremism. A tribal sharecropper in Naxalbari village gets attacked by a landlord's men. Instead of backing down, the villagers revolt. They are led by a teacher named Kanu Sanyal, a peasant named Jangal Santhal, and a fiery Marxist ideologue, Charu Majumdar. They aren't just asking for land, they want revolution. Inspired by Mao Zedong, they believe India is ripe for people's war. Majumdar writes his famous 8 historic documents. The message: forget elections, take up arms. Okay, uh, yeah, okay. Look at these documents. I have been reading these since the last couple of days. So, what I did is I pulled out a digital copy of what are known as the 8 historic documents written by Charu Majumdar, the man who led the Naxalbari uprising, I just said. Now, just read these lines. In today's world, this feels less like a political writing and more like a radical playbook, a toolkit meant just for violence. And if it feels frightening now, imagine what this sounded like in the early 70s or in the 80s or the 90s. This ideology didn't just stay on paper. Okay, back to the video. In the 1970s and 80s, the rebellion spreads. Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Maharashtra, Jharkhand. Tribals living in the forest interiors join what they see as a class war. Groups like the People's War Group and the MCC rise up. The Red Corridor is born over 200 districts, a third of India. The rebels control forests, levy taxes, run parallel governments. They burn voting booths, execute informers, ambush police patrols. From 2004 to 2010, India entered what security agencies later called the Blood Years, a phase where Maoist violence hit its peak. It's May 21st, 2009. Deep inside Gadchiroli, Maharashtra, a 16-member police team is out doing something routine, clearing a road that Maoists had blocked during a shutdown. But what they don't know is that they are being watched. From the forests around, Maoist fighters are already in position, and then it hits. A sudden burst of gunfire, a 3-hour ambush, 16 officers, including 5 women constables, are completely outnumbered and killed. The Maoists move in, loot the weapons, burn the police vehicles, and vanish into the forests. A year later came the attack that changed everything. April 2010, Dantewada, Chhattisgarh. A company of CRPF Jawans was returning from an anti-Naxal sweep. They paused in an open field, unaware they were walking into a classic Maoist trap. Hundreds of Maoist fighters had positioned themselves along the tree line in a U-shaped formation. They fired from higher ground, cutting off every escape route. 75 CRPF personnel were killed. It was the deadliest attack ever carried out by Maoists in India. This wasn't random violence, it was a well planned military style ambush. Then, in 2013, the Maoists targeted politicians directly. A Congress convoy traveling through Jhiram Ghati, Chhattisgarh was intercepted. Dozens of armed Maoists blocked the road, opened fire, and surrounded the vehicles. Senior leaders were dragged out, executed, and left on the road to die. It wasn't an attack, it was a political assassination designed to send a message that we control this region. Now, these were just isolated incidents that grabbed the national headlines. But if you step back, you start to see a pattern. Let me explain. Because look at this, a timeline of major Naxal attacks across India over the time. Wave after wave, different states, same playbook, same message. This wasn't random violence, it was an evolving insurgency. By this time, Maoists weren't even just jungle rebels, they operated like a parallel state. They trained in jungle camps, used AK-47s, mortars, even landmine assembly units, communicated through satellite phones, received funding over rupees 1000 crore a year, extorted from contractors, mining companies, small businesses, anyone working in their territory. Schools were blown up so children couldn't be educated. Road construction crews were attacked so development never reached villages. Anyone who resisted Maoist orders, villagers, informants, local leaders, simply disappeared. Around 2014, something fundamental changed. A new government came in, and with it, a new counter-insurgency strategy.
मैं नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूं कि
Home Minister Amit Shah had set the tone on agenda Archduck stage, vowing to put a total stop to Naxalism in the country by March 2026.
मैं सबसे पहले एक बात इस सदन में जिम्मेदारी के साथ बताना चाहता हूं, 21 मार्च 2026 को इस देश से नक्सलवाद समाप्त।
Not just more forces, but this was a complete restructuring of how India dealt with the Maoist belt. The Home Ministry rolled out a long term strategy called Samadhan Prahar. It wasn't a single operation, it was an entire framework designed to hit Maoists on every front. Earlier, Maoists thrived because the state was invisible. No roads, no phone network, no banks. If a villager needed help, the Maoists arrived before the government even knew something had happened. So, India started building fast. Roads were pushed deep into forests where even bicycles couldn't reach earlier. Mobile towers went up in regions that had lived in radio silence for more than 30 years. Electricity, schools, ration shops, banking vans, the everyday symbols of the state began appearing in areas once written off as Maoist territory. At the same time, security presence multiplied. From a handful of scattered bases, police and CRPF camps expanded to hundreds. Drones began buzzing over treetops, tracking movement that was once invisible. Thermal cameras spotted nighttime camps. For the first time, the dense forests, the Maoists' biggest weapon, started becoming transparent. And then came the human shift. As development started reaching these villages, something changed in the conversations at the tea stalls, in weekly markets, in the fields. People who once feared these Maoists began quietly distancing themselves, and information started flowing to the police and the security agencies. Middle rank commanders of these insurgent groups realized that the organization was now shrinking. Over the next few years, thousands surrendered, walking out of the jungles with rifles slung over their shoulders. It wasn't one dramatic event, it was a slow, steady collapse of a system that had ruled for decades. The moment the state entered these forgotten regions, with roads, with connectivity, with presence, the Maoist hold began to crack. By the early 2020s, something remarkable was happening. Something that would have been impossible a decade ago was happening now.
So it's the third Naxal attack in Chhattisgarh in 2 days.
Naxals, including a woman cadre, were arrested.
Two injured in a Naxal attack in Chhattisgarh.
India is now inching closer to being free of red terror or Maoist terror by 2026.
Maoist has surfaced in the state of Chhattisgarh. And what does it say? That the group is willing to surrender, that they will lay down arms and begin talks.
13 Maoists have reportedly been killed and 50 others been captured over the course of Operation Sambhav.
Top and most notorious commanders of the Naxals, along with his wife Rajay and some other close followers, were killed in an encounter by the Andhra Pradesh police.
The Red Corridor, once a massive stretch of insurgent strongholds, was shrinking, not slowly but dramatically. At its peak, Maoist influence touched more than 200 districts across India. Today, that number is down to just 18 districts, a collapse on a scale experts once believed would take generations. And the impact shows up not just on the map but in the numbers. Attacks that once dominated headlines fell sharply. From 2010 to 2024, casualties dropped by over 85%. But the real story lies in the villages that were once cut off from the rest of India. For the first time, these tribal communities saw roads reaching their hamlets, classrooms opening where only abundant buildings stood, mobile networks lighting up phones that were useless for decades. Children who grew up listening to gunfire were now walking to schools with notebooks. Even inside the movement, the tide had turned. Hundreds of cadres started giving up their arms. Former rebels who once lived in underground bunkers now stand in line for jobs, training programs, and rehabilitation packages. And places where hosting the tricolor was a death sentence today host full Independence Day celebrations. It didn't happen overnight, but the fall of the Red Corridor is one of the most dramatic turnarounds of India's internal security history. For all the progress that we just discussed in the video, one truth still remains. Deep inside the forest of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, small scattered groups of Maoists still operate. Yes, I agree with the current efforts of the government. Their numbers are fewer, their leadership is completely dismantled and fractured. Even in the recent news, you might have seen various leaders of these tribal movements have given up or died in crossfiring with the forces. But the terrain is vast, and the grievances that once ignited the movement didn't vanish overnight. Surrendered cadres now they speak up openly with interviewers, with journalists, with the media, and they have two things to say. Some say the organization is collapsing, others warn that new recruits can still emerge if old wounds aren't addressed properly. So here's the real question now. Will any vacuum in governance, or security allow extremist groups to regroup? Or has the state's expansion into these regions, be it roads, intelligence networks, permanent security presence, political integration, and economic activity, finally shut down the space for any kind of armed revolution? Because insurgencies don't end with gunfights, they end when the state becomes impossible to challenge. The next decade will show whether India has simply defeated Maoist cadres on the ground or permanently dismantled the environment that lets such groups operate at all. What started as an ideological uprising turned into a sustained campaign of terror. India's fight wasn't at the borders, it was inside its own districts, its own cities, its own states, where Maoists tried to replace the state by force. Now, with the Red Corridor collapsing and violence at historic lows, the aftermath of that era still shadows the regions it once scarred. This was India's longest internal conflict. All right, that's the story. Everything I used, from news reports to government data to every little data source, is linked in the description. And if you're watching till now, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.